your seatbelts, but we will be done by noon. So there you go. Don't. Hey, today we have a very interesting message, and I'm not saying that because I'm preaching. I'm saying it's because of what the Scripture is, okay? And the Scripture is one of those Scriptures where you look at, and there is so much in it that you think to yourself, wow. And it introduces, I said this on Friday night, I said it'll introduce, our message is we're about to enter into a scriptural story about the only woman in the patriarchal era that the Lord clearly spoke to. And that sets her apart. I mean, we have no record of God speaking to Sarah. God told Abraham to listen to his wife. We have no record of Rachel and Leah hearing the word of the Lord. But we do know that God spoke to Rebekah and that she was a woman who believed God even more than her husband. So we'll get into all of that as we walk through the Isaac and Rebekah story. But today is the day that it starts out. And as it starts out today, I've entitled today's message, Inviting the Lord into Our Circumstances. Okay, this is critically important for our lives. We don't do this at our own peril. When we do this, we open the door to tremendous encouragement. The Lord told Gideon, you need to go out and lead, attack the enemy. And Gideon invited the Lord a little bit more closely and said, yeah, it's a great idea. Can we have a sign? I need to have some fleece, either wet or dry. And the Lord graciously responded to him both times. And here's the thing. If you're asking the Lord to show you something and you believe that the Lord will respond, why wouldn't he respond? He's growing his language with you. So, inviting the Lord into our circumstances, and that's what we're going to see today. As we find out that there's a problem that Abraham recognizes right now, the timing is right, it's time to get Isaac married off. Okay? So, he's looking for heirs. So, Genesis 24:1 starts out, opens the story. Abraham was an old man, quite advanced in age, and Yahweh had blessed Abraham in everything. So we're hearing that Abraham has really gotten old. He's growing older, advancing in age. You know, one of the commentaries I read, and it's not really a commentary, it's designed to help people who are translating Hebrew into different languages. It's designed to help them so that they can figure out how they can express things in different languages that it's difficult to express things in. And one of the things he said is, when you're trying to say how old Abraham is in some languages, you might want to say something, he was down to his last hair. Yeah, I just thought that was funny enough to mention. Anyway, so I told you this could be a very interesting day. You're down to his last hair. Okay, so he's growing older. He's advancing in age. He's advancing in days is literally what it says. He's really getting up there. So how old was he? Well, we know that he was 100 years old when Isaac was born. Isaac was now 40 when he got married, so Abraham's 140. He was going to live to 175. He's still having kids now. Okay, we're going to hear about that. Okay? So, he's old and he's up there in years, but he's still being fairly prolific. And the Lord is certainly that whatever he started back when it was time for Isaac to be born had certainly continued. So, his body was no longer dead. Let's just put it that way. So he's growing older, he's advancing in age, and Yahweh had blessed him in everything. Whenever I have the word Yahweh show up, especially because I don't know if there's someone new in the audience on a particular Sunday, I just want to point out, Yahweh is what we call the tetragrammaton. Most Bible translations, translated as capital L, capital O, capital R, capital D. A friend of mine was really published something this week that was a guy was really excited because he found evidence. He said that it must be pronounced Jehovah instead of Yahweh, and because of some things that were in the Vatican library, it was wrong. Anyway. Most scholars recognize that the vowels that make up the word Jehovah were actually added by the Masoretes, who added the vowels to the Hebrew consonants. It didn't have it before that. About 1000 AD, they added the vowels to the Hebrew consonants because they didn't want the pronunciation of Hebrew to be lost. And very few people were speaking it back in 1000 AD. And so the Masoretes put in the vowel pointing, but when you got to the tetragrammaton, which it's called, which in our language would be YHWH, when they got to the tetragrammaton, they put in the vowels for Adonai, which if you take those vowels and you put it with the consonants, it's Yehovah, which is not something any Hebrew speaker would have said. But, of course, some English speakers have said it. And there was a guy who said that it was a video that a friend of mine published, and I didn't respond to it. Didn't want to go there. But he was saying they found this manuscript in the Vatican Library from 12 or 1300 AD. And it had vowel points in it. In the translation of Luke, the Hebrew translation of Luke. The problem is it was about 300 years after the Masoretes started adding vowel pointing, and they would have pointed just like the Masoretes did, so that it proves absolutely nothing. But he was having an exciting time about it, so I was like, okay, don't rain on anyone's parade. I'm telling you so you don't fall for it if it starts to make the rounds. But anyway, it's pronounced Yahweh, and, whenever he spoke to the patriarchs, Moses, he didn't talk about himself in the name Yahweh with them, but whenever he spoke to Moses, he said his name, Yahweh, Yahweh, the compassionate and gracious God. He didn't say the Lord, the Lord. That's us. It's Yahweh, Yahweh, the compassionate and gracious God. So he proclaimed his name. And his name had meaning. So I just wanted to take that little excursus. And what had Yahweh done? Yahweh had blessed Abraham in everything. All things. That is an amazing thing to say about someone's life. That he had been blessed in everything. Now, he was the father of faith. We walk in his footsteps. It should be our endeavor to walk in such a way that the Lord can bless us in everything. Okay? And the Lord had said to Abraham, walk before me without blemish. And, when you think about, what about the mistakes he made? He blessed Abraham. How do I know? Because he stopped Pharaoh when Pharaoh was cohabitating with Sarah and made sure that ended. He made sure nothing happened with Abimelech. Again, when Abraham was doing something that wasn't blameless, the Lord still intervened to take care of the situation. That is a blessing. Whenever the Lord protects us from our own stupidity, that's a blessing. He blessed Abraham in everything, and he became a wealthy prince that even the kings of the land were making treaties with because he intimidated them so much. So we get this opening statement. Abraham's old, 140 years old. We heard about that 115-year-old woman. By the way, we never really know if that is the oldest woman because of the fact that records 100 years ago weren't nearly as... Okay, there could be people that are sneaking around at 120 and 25. John could still be alive. That'd be hard to break his record. Okay, so anyway, we've got Abraham blessed in every way, and that sets up the story. Abraham's getting up there in years, and now he's thinking about Isaac. Isaac is 40 years old. He's not married yet. He doesn't have any children yet, and there's a promise out there that God has given about Abraham's seed. And so it says, then Abraham said to his servant, the senior servant in his household, who had authority over all that Abraham owned, now place your hand under my thigh, and I will make you swear by Yahweh, God of the heavens and God of the earth, that you will not take a wife for my son from the daughters of the Canaanites among whom I am living. For you will travel to my land and my relatives and take a wife for my son Isaac. Okay, Isaac's 40. The servant, there's a chief servant of his house. By the way, we know about a guy named Eliezer from Genesis 15:2, but Genesis 15:2 is a long time past. And there may be a new senior servant or chief of staff but his name is never mentioned, which is why I suspect it's not Eliezer, the name that has already been mentioned in Genesis 15:2. And that was mentioned in Abraham's prayer, saying, Lord, I don't have an heir. Eliezer is going to have to be my heir. And that was the last we hear of Eliezer. So now Abraham is concerned for Isaac having an heir. And so he goes through this cultural oath-taking ritual. And it's awkward, to put it mildly. Let's just put it this way. You would not want to put your hand where he is telling his servant to put his hand. Okay? You just would not want to do this. And the reason is, by the way, I've translated it thigh. It's clearly thigh in many, many contexts, like thigh, right? Okay? But it also, in the book of Genesis itself, in Genesis 46:26, and then right away in Exodus 1:5, it says that a man's descendants comes from his thigh. So you understand the picture, okay? So there's certainly a whole lot about the productive region in all of this. And this is about heirs, and so this could have been a really earthy thing that was going on. Lots and lots of commentary written about this. You just need to know that it was an oath-taking ritual. And that by doing this, it's kind of like putting your hand on the Bible. Okay, there was something external where you were saying, yes, I am going to carry this out. So he says, hey, do this thing. I need to have you take this oath. And the oath is simply this, that we can't have a Canaanite wife for Isaac. Which explains why Isaac wasn't married. He's 40 years old, or almost 40, and he's not married because there's no one around for him to get married to. And what was the issue? I'm pretty sure the issue is idolatry. They weren't Canaanites did not worship Yahweh. However, we are going to hear very clearly that up where his relatives are, they knew Yahweh. And they may have had some issues with worshiping him with idols and stuff like that, because that was commonplace. Even if you were worshiping Yahweh, you'd still have an idol. But, and that's what the Lord said, don't do that, right? But they did. But anyway, they knew Yahweh. That's where Abraham had come from. He knew Yahweh, and he knew it because he grew up in his household, his father's household, where they knew Yahweh. And so he wanted someone who would worship Yahweh. Again, Jacob needed to go there to get a wife. Again, finding someone who understood or worshiped Yahweh. Remember how Esau got in trouble? Esau got in trouble because, he married Canaanite women. And when he saw how displeasing that was to his parents, he went over and married an Ishmaelite woman. Because why? What's the difference? Ishmael came out of Abraham's household. He knew Yahweh. So he married someone who knew Yahweh by going to the Ishmaelites. So anyway, at least that was a step up from the Canaanite women who were idolaters. Okay, so that's what's going on in this particular verse. The servant asked him, it is possible that the woman may not want to travel with me to this land. Do I need to bring your son back to the land from which you came? Abraham said to him, watch yourself that you do not return my son back there. Okay, so the servant's concerned. I mean, by the way, this is about a month's trip, one way. Okay, so we're not talking a jaunt, and we know he's supposed to go up there, and he knows no one up there. He knows Abraham's relatives by name, but now he's going to have to go up there and try to find a bride. And what if he couldn't find a bride? He's trying to figure out, what am I swearing to? Because you don't swear to things without knowing what you are swearing to. Because otherwise, you may be repenting to the Lord or being held guilty before the Lord for breaking an oath. So, the servant wanted to make sure he understood. What if no one was willing? Do I need to bring your son back? Do I need to bring him back to the ancestral land so that he can get married? Is that what you're saying? And Abraham gives a strong response. I mean, when he says, watch yourself, it was like he was shocked. No, don't bring him back. Don't take him up there. That's not the place you're supposed to take him. And he explains why. Yahweh, the God of the heavens, who took me from the house of my father and from the land of my relatives, and who spoke to me and swore an oath to me, saying, to your seed I will give this land. He will send his angel ahead of you so that you can take a wife for my son there. But if the woman does not want to travel with you, you will be released from this oath of mine. Only do not return my son back there. So, Abraham's helping his servant. First of all, he's letting us know. He's saying to him, don't get in Yahweh's way, because this is what Yahweh has done. He gave me this promise. The promise is this land is being given to my seed. That means I'm going to have heirs. That means Isaac's going to have a faithful wife. And so you're going to go up there and you're going to get a faithful wife. But he needs to stay here at all costs because the land is being given to his seed, Abraham's seed, but obviously through Isaac now. And if the woman won't come back, you're free. No more. You don't do anything else. But Yahweh's going to have to do something different and get this thing figured out. And so it was a pretty clear thing. Land's coming to my seed. Obviously, we need to have a wife, and that means the Lord's going to provide a wife. You hear his faith, right? He had blessed Abraham in everything. You think he thought he was going to get let down now? You know, at a certain point in your life, and at a certain point in my life, it is unbelief not to expect God to move on our behalf. Okay? I told you about the sign. I expect God to move on our behalf. I expect, and by the way, God's got far more wisdom than I do about what's going to look good and what's going to be appropriate. I've got an opinion, but I haven't heard about the Lord on this, from the Lord on this opinion. And so by the time everything is said and done, I have no doubt the Lord's going to have orchestrated things so that it is absolutely a blessing to this congregation. Okay. Now, that is because over the years I have seen him do so many things to help us along the way, both as a congregation and as an individual. At this point in my life, if I do not believe that God is going to work things out for my good and the good of my family and the good of this congregation, it's unbelief. So I'm presenting that to you because at a certain point, if you don't live up to the things that God has done for you in the past, the New Testament calls that little faith. Little faith is a manifestation of unbelief. You are not living up to your experience of what God has done for you. That's little faith according to the New Testament. So we've got Abraham demonstrating that he lives in faith. This really isn't great faith. Great faith is when you live above your experience of God, but you do it logically. That's the centurion, that's the Syrophoenician woman. But faith is just living at the level of your experience of God. And after Abraham has been blessed in everything, he's got faith. He's the father of faith. And so he is living up to his level of experience of God. This is going to be taken care of. The Lord's going to send an angel ahead of you so that you can take a wife for my son there. You hear the confidence in that? I mean, that's incredible. He knew. So And then he says to the servant, because he knows the servant's just a human being, but if it doesn't work this way, you're freed from your oath. Because the servant's still thinking, am I going to take this oath? By the way, when the servant tells Laban about the oath later, he uses a different Hebrew word, and it's a Hebrew word that speaks of being cursed if you break the oath. Now, there's no suggestion of that in this story. However, as we see the oath entered into, but in the servant's mind, it was one of those oaths that you take and say, may I be cursed if I don't follow through. And so he was not at all going to do this. Abraham made sure that he understood, if this happens, you're free. So that helped the servant to be able to do or take the oath. Then the servant placed his hand under the thigh of Abraham, his Lord, and swore to him about this responsibility. So the servant took 10 camels from the camels of his Lord. He traveled forth with every good thing of his master in his hand. He arose and traveled to Aram Naharaim, got it, to the city of Nahor. Okay, so he's on his way. And he takes the oath. He accepts the mission. He says, the tape self-destructs after it. You have to be a certain age to know that reference. Okay, I know there's been newer Mission Impossibles, but the servant accepts his mission, and he takes 10 camels laden with goods. 10. Camels were not that prolific. That tells you how much Abraham had. Because he's sending 10 camels laden with the best of his household along. This is a wealthy man. And more than likely, the camels were a part of the gift. Not all 10, because they needed to come back with a retinue and with whatever the new wife would need, but it was a princely amount of stuff. And of course, it was for the bridal price. There was always a bridal price. And now you understand what the bridal price was for. The bridal price was for the fact that you were about to take this productive young lady who has been working in the household, doing her chores, getting water every night or whatever, and you're about to take her into your household where she's going to use her working ability to provide for a new household. So now a bridal price is to compensate the household for the loss of the labor and the loss of the young woman. Okay, that's a bridal price. Now think about what they were doing. Not only would she be across the street or down the road, she was going to be in an entirely different country. And they didn't have Zoom. They didn't have cell phones. And so this, you have to send a pretty big bridal price in order to be able to compensate the household for what you're about to do. That's why Jacob had to serve for 7 years with Laban. It was a bridal price. And then 7 more years once but those bridal prices were loss of service to the household. Okay, so 10 camels. This is what got Laban's attention, by the way. We'll see that not today, but in the next messages. But very interested in being nice to this servant because he had lots of goodies. Okay, he went to Aram Naharaim. There he goes. Aram of the 2 rivers. Now, Aram was Syria, and just to the north of Israel was Syria. That's not where he was going. He was going much further north. It's Aram of the 2 rivers. And if you'll see down in the lower left, just a little bit north of Canaan, there's Aram, Syria. But now there was greater Syria way up across the Euphrates River. That whole section between the Habor River and the Balik River are all in this greater Syria area. That's where he was going. You can see there's a city just to the right of the red letters Aram Naharaim, and that's Haran. Okay, that's where he was headed. He would have been headed to Haran unless he knew that there was a city named Nahor. And because he was headed to the city of Nahor. There actually is a city that they think may have been named after Nahor, but it was really close to Haran, which is where you'd expect it to be, because Haran was founded by Abraham's father and the retinue that first came from Ur of the Chaldees. And it would not be a stretch to imagine that Nahor then started his own city a little bit further away, started his own settlement, and it began to grow. But in any case, he ends up outside the city that Nahor and his family were living in. Okay? By the way, that's Abraham's brother. Okay? As evening approached, at the time the women go out to draw water, he made the camels kneel down outside the city near a well of water. He said, Yahweh, God of my Lord Abraham, please grant me success today and demonstrate loving kindness to my Lord Abraham. This is a servant showing up and realizing, I'm here. I've made it. I better have a chat with God. Because now what do I do? Do I go in and just say, hey, who wants to go on a long journey with me? Okay. He has to figure out what's going on. So as evening approached, he arrived at the city. Cooler part of the day, which means that's when the women would come out and get the water for that evening and the next day so that they could cook and clean and do all the things that you need with water. And so he made the camels kneel down. That's a nice position of rest for camels. You know the picture in your head if you've ever seen camels as they're kneeling. And they're outside of the city near the well of water that the city used. So his prayer is he's recognizing that this is going to need God's success. Abraham had said he's going to send his angel ahead of you. Put yourself in his position once. You're in the middle of nowhere. I remember the first time that I traveled overseas to do a trip, a conference, a teaching. I'd go out and I'd teach different things that were assigned to me to be able to go into an area. First place I ever went was Kiev. And as I'm on my way there, I'm thinking to myself, I'm going alone, I'm on a plane, I've been given an assignment, I got all my materials written, they know I'm coming, they're going to pick me up at the airport, but as I'm on my way there, I'm going, boy, I've never done anything like this. And now I'm going to a country where, used to be Soviet Union. And now I'm going and we're having a big conference and a big teaching, and I am the one who's going to be bringing a majority of the teaching material. And you think to yourself, God, are you going to show me? Give me evidence that you are with me. And boy, he did tons. Okay. Now, by the way, I could still call home. I could still call back to the United States. I could still touch in. I could email. There was all sorts of access. It's not nearly the threat of a guy showing up outside of a city where he knows no one. Abraham, I'm here. Who should I be talking to? None of that. And so he says, I need to talk to the Lord. And so it's a fervent prayer that God would demonstrate his loving kindness to Abraham. That's the Hebrew word chesed. And chesed, when it's referring to God, it's most often translated loving kindness. And it's a direct reflection of God's loving kindness shown us into everything that he did through his son, Jesus. What the Father did through Jesus. And if you look at Romans 8, and it says, he who did not spare his own son, how will he not also along with him give us all good things? That's a good scripture to remember when you think of chesed, or the loving kindness of God. Because after he's given us his son, the Father has given us his son, and Jesus was in agreement with us, how will they not together give us all good things? And God had blessed all things in Abraham's life. Loving kindness, chesed. Paul may have been thinking when he wrote in Romans 8 about this story. So he says, please demonstrate loving kindness to Abraham. And then he does his Gideon test. Look, I am standing by a spring of water, and the daughters of the men of the city are coming out to draw water. Now let it happen that the young unmarried girl to whom I say, please let your jar down so that I may drink, and she says, drink, and I will also water your camels. May she be the one appointed for your servant, for Isaac. I will know by it that you have demonstrated loving kindness to my Lord. This is a very interesting prayer. You see how precise it is? I need to know exactly that is the woman. We're not wasting time. So he is expecting an extraordinary response from the young woman. You understand, he's already a strange man asking someone for a drink of water. You know, you're holding this thing on your shoulder, big vase, big thing. And to bring it down is not like super simple, but it's something that someone will do for someone else unless they just want to diss them. But that, he says, her next thing is to say, and by the way, I'll get you enough water for your 10 camels. Okay, you understand, camels drink a whole lot of water. And the idea that someone would voluntarily say, oh, and by the way, I will get your camels watered, 10 of them, is incredible. I mean, this is like, when you find a woman like this, you keep her. I did, by the way. Dawn said, I'll water your camels. Get the hose. Yeah, that's what we would do. Just get the hose. So anyway, but it was, this is a big request. This isn't a minor request. This is huge. It's just amazing. Anyway, then it happened that before he finished speaking, at just that moment, Rebekah came out with a jar upon her shoulder. She was born to Bethuel, son of Milcah, the wife of Abraham's brother Nahor. The young girl was very beautiful, a virgin who had never been intimate with a man. She came down to the spring, filled her jar, and came up. So, he's praying, and while he's praying, Rebekah shows up. Now, you have to understand, he doesn't know she's Rebekah. He doesn't know that she's a relative of Abraham. She knows Isaac and her are cousins. He knows none of this. She's coming out of the city to draw water. If she was following the custom of the time, there was probably a veil on her face. Maybe not. I don't know. We do find out later when she sees Isaac, she veils herself, but she didn't have her veil on the entire time. So veils were a thing, and so it wasn't like he could look in her face and says, she looks kind of like Isaac. Maybe this could be one. Okay. None of that. She comes walking out, and she goes down to the spring. She's a beautiful young lady, okay? Probably means, well, she was beautiful, whether or not we find that out later or not. Maybe she didn't have a veil on if he was able to see that. And he wouldn't know this, of course, but we're being told this, that she was a virgin and never been intimate in any way with a man. There's two words that are kind of piled up here. One of them often translated virgin, and then the other Hebrew word is no. And usually when Adam knew his wife, it means that he had sexual intimacy with her, and it produced an offspring. But when you pile up the word virgin with the word no, it probably is just really pointing out that there was no interaction with males in an inappropriate way. Because, of course, you can still be a virgin and still have had inappropriate connection, okay? And so this is saying no, none of that with this young lady. She has been absolutely apart from other men. And so we get told that he doesn't know anything about it. So she goes down, she goes to the spring, fills her jar. By the way, Isaiah 65:24 said, it'll happen. This is the Lord's promise. It'll happen that before they call, I will respond. While they are still speaking, I will hear. This is obviously what happened because Rebekah's on her way. The Lord's saying, that he's about to pray, and she's already almost to the spring. And so when she walks out, probably one of the first people he sees after the prayer, he's finishing the prayer, and here's this young lady walking by. And he's watching her, and then it says, the servant ran to speak to her and said, please give me a bit of water from your jar to drink. Then she said, "Drink, my lord." And she hurried and brought her jar down to her hand and provided him with a drink. When she had finished giving him a drink, she added, "Let me also draw water for your camels until they finish drinking." He probably almost choked on the water he was drinking. So the test is initiated. He goes running up to the first young lady he sees. And it's, the Lord's not even going to make this suspenseful. It isn't like he has to go, "Oh, that one didn't work. That one didn't work." Eventually, he would have got very not thirsty anymore if this happened for a while. But so the test is initiated, and he's asking for normal hospitality. This is not an over and above thing. It's just nice hospitality. By the way, Abraham was the master of hospitality. She was going to be coming into a household where hospitality was a big thing. So this is a great test. Does she have a natural inclination to hospitality? But his test was even bigger than that. She had to do the way extraordinary over above hospitality. And that wasn't necessarily something that everyone would do, because this is a big deal, watering 10 camels. And obviously, she had to be concerned about kindness to animals, which would interest some of you. This is a woman who's interested in kindness to animals. She either slaughters them and eats them or takes care of them. Well, let's remember what the age that we're living in. Okay, so she was doing that extraordinary hospitality thing. So she hurried, emptied her jar into the trough, and ran again to the well to draw water. Then she drew water for all the camels. The man observed her closely, staying silent while he determined whether or not Yahweh had made his journey a success. So, by the way, she had to hurry. So she hurried. It was going to be forever otherwise. You got to imagine that the minimum for each camel was one of those jars. Okay? The minimum. Okay? And probably took a couple, but certainly she didn't have to be the one responsible for filling their tanks totally, but breaking their thirst. And so she was able to water them at whatever was the appropriate level, but she certainly had to hurry because of course, and her family was waiting for her yet. They had sent her to the spring, and at a certain point, they're going to be saying, "Where is she?" And sending out a party to find out if she's talking to the other young ladies and spending too much time there. So she drew water for all the camels, and it says the man observed her closely, staying silent. Why was he staying silent? He wasn't trying to help her. This is a test. He wanted to make sure it was a true test, not saying anything. He didn't even suggest she water the camels. And she says, "Yeah, let me do that." And he's watching her saying, is she really going to water all the camels? That's what he's waiting for. Is she going to do a good job of watering the camels, or is this just so many words? So he's watching, and the reason he's watching is he's checking to see if God had answered his prayer, made his journey a success. He certainly didn't forget what he prayed because he had just prayed it. Sometimes we pray things and we forget that we prayed it. And then all of a sudden, God responds, and we think to ourselves, I wonder if I prayed about that. That's why people keep prayer journals, so that they can keep track of things that they've asked God that may take longer to come in. I mentioned this maybe a month or so ago, but the Lord gave Dawn and I a word that he was going to restore or rejuvenate our 5 senses. Okay? And so the next morning, I'm drinking coffee and whole bean, fresh ground, espresso, made on my kitchen counter. It's wonderful. But I'm drinking coffee, and I taste it, and I think to myself, man, that's good. My goodness, what's going on with that? So I drank that cup of coffee down because it was so good. I couldn't get enough of it. I was like, and it finally hit me. The Lord said he was going to restore or rejuvenate your senses. Taste is one of the senses. And so I remembered that because it was only the day before. Now, because I did mention it publicly here, it kind of gets seated in my head, but we do keep a record of these things. This is not something that we do not have written down. We keep a very complete inventory of promises that God has given to us, because it allows us to go back and say, yes, he did that one, or that one's still waiting, and so we need to pray more about it or pray it in or whatever. Find out how we can position ourselves for the fulfillment of this. But you understand, when we're talking about restoring your five senses, right? Sight, smell, taste, hearing, touch. When you're restoring your five senses, it's like this is going to be something that you should see happening. And so anyway, this morning I was drinking coffee again, and I'm thinking to myself, man, that's really good. I mean, really. And I went to have a second cup, and I only drink 2 cups on Sunday morning before I come here. Then I have 2 more cups. But it was good here. It was good there. Different coffee makers, same beans, but different coffee makers. And this morning, I was enamored by the coffee. At home, I made myself a 3rd cup, which is too much. I took a couple sips, had to dump it out because I don't want to come here vibrating. But because I'm going to drink the 2 cups here. That's a given. But I realized the Lord's restoring taste. And so I started taking inventory. And I just thought, okay, yesterday morning, my eyes seemed to be working better than usual. If you were here Friday night, you saw me reading 8 points, fonts out of that Bible that we had, the prison Bible. Okay, I don't wear glasses, I don't wear contacts, and I'm not going to say how old I am. Thank God I'm not as old as Abraham. Okay, 25 plus. But the fact that people in their 40s, which I saw quite a long time ago, when I turned 40, already are wearing cheaters. And I do, when I'm reading my computer for a long time or I'm reading a book, I'll put on something that magnifies a little bit more. But when I can read 8 point clearly with nothing on my eyes, that's a pretty big deal. And I was like, wow. On Friday night, I'm during the midst of this. Now, you have to understand, I know I'm under the anointing in a meeting, and that can make all the difference too. But I'm doing an inventory, and I realize even at home as I'm reading my Bible, which again is small print, the Bible that I use at home, and I'm realizing it's absolutely clear I am wearing cheaters, but that doesn't, it's the lowest, it's like the lowest magnification. I over the years, I've never increased them because I refuse. And I'll pray about my eyes. If I increase them, I won't pray about my eyes. So I keep praying about it. But anyway, so I was thinking, okay, and my eyes have been pretty good. And then I thought, what about touch? And those are the hearing. I don't know. I haven't noticed anything specifically. Although there was some weird stuff this week hearing-wise, but I won't get into that. But I thought touch. And I said, okay, so how do you... And then I realized... oh, there's that thing that old guys get. I don't qualify. But there's that thing that older people get, or more mature people get, it causes pins and needles and numbness. And I, for the life of me, couldn't think of the name of it. And I'm thinking, okay, I got to look it up. And I'm in back, and I'm thinking, okay, I'm just going to pull out my phone, and I'm going to go to my browser, and I'm going to look up what's the name, blah, 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 blah. And as I open my phone, it's on the mail program, and I see heal neuropathy. So it's the first email. And then it disappears because it's junk. So that second, it shows up and then disappears. And it said neuropathy. And I went, oh, I don't have to look it up. I now know what it is. It's neuropathy. I just out of it. And so I thought to myself, but the reason I was looking it up was simply this. I've had neuropathy try to come against me, and I felt the pain of it. I didn't know that was something that came with pain. I was talking to a group of veterans once who all said they had to be on major pain medication because of neuropathy, how painful it can be. And I realized that pain, I prayed about it right away. You trust me, I was praying when I started to feel some of that. pain went away instantly, but there was still some areas on my right foot where I could realize I'm not feeling perfectly well. I'm not, it's like it's almost numb. And it's not that way anymore. It's gone, okay? I got full feeling on my feet right now. And I know that the Lord is filling that promise. And the reason I'm bringing this up right now is because the Lord said to Abraham, I'm going to give your seed the land. That promise got him on the road, got him moving with his servant, and the servant got outside of a city, and the Lord met him because Abraham believed a promise. And this is where we're ending today, but I'm simply saying to you, the Lord will meet you when you grab onto a promise that he is giving you and believe that he will fulfill it. And just write the stuff down that you believe the Lord is speaking to you. Write the stuff down that you are praying. By the way it works in a congregation is this. When I get touched by God, it's an invitation for everyone in the congregation to get touched by God in the same way. Okay? That's the way it works. So, Lord, I thank you for this opportunity today to study this very important section of Scripture, which reminds us of your ways and how you work with us. I ask that we would believe your promises, remember our prayers, and thank you every time you fulfill them, in whether it's healing or whatever it is. In your name, Jesus, I pray. Amen.